And now it's my pleasure and my privilege to introduce my friend, a leader that inspires with wisdom and wit, Dr. Tony Frank, the 14th president of Colorado State University and chancellor of the Colorado State University System.
Thank you, Paula, and very nice homage to Lincoln. I appreciate that. Most of you know that I consider it a failed speech if Lincoln can't be mentioned. Let me add my welcome to all of you as well, and think about this event and how far those people who were here last year know that this event has come from its inception, where it was a much smaller gathering, and here we are today, and what a great turnout. I look forward to seeing where this event goes in future years. I have to admit I struggled a little bit with what I would say to you all, for a couple reasons, I suppose. One is it's spring, and so almost all my speeches are about congratulations on the work you've done and what you'll do after graduation. And so if I lapse into that and start congratulating all of you, and I'll apologize ahead of time. Secondly, as Paula alluded to, I do tend to look to Lincoln for inspiration, and Lincoln did not say much on the topic of women or the suffrage movement of the day, and what he did say about that, there's some debate about the context in which it was delivered, so I didn't really have any Lincolnisms to sort of guide me there. And thirdly, the last speech I gave, which was at an alumni event in Arizona, I actually dropped one of the guests. During my speech, a gentleman passed out. It's a new one for me. I had not accomplished that particular thing before. It got me to thinking about the power of words, and you'll notice there are some waivers on your tables that we'll have to sign, and EMTs are standing by around the room. So with all of that sort of floating around in my head, I thought, well, I better find some new material for this speech and come up with something interesting. So over the weekend, I dug into that vast trove of human knowledge that is the internet and started searching women in philanthropy. And there are no shortage of rabbit holes one can go down on the internet, as you all know, and I find myself relatively easily distracted and coming back out of these going, that was all well and interesting, but it's not going to have anything to do with the speech I'm about to give. And there was no shortage of those moments for me as well. There is a fairly new body of literature on women in philanthropy. Much of it deals with the role of women as partners. Melinda Gates, Priscilla Chan. That wasn't really where I wanted to go with this. There's Deb Marsh's work out of the Lilly School of Philanthropy at IU. But much of that work is behavioral, describing behavioral differences in how women give versus men. And you don't have to go very far into that literature before those observations are attempting to be explained. And you don't have to go very far down explaining observations before you're into this exploding body of knowledge about differences in the male and female brain, well beyond neurochemistry. And before you know it, if you're from a life science background as I am, you're fascinated by tenfold differences in white matter and what that might mean for processing speeds and multitasking, and differences in neuronal density in the hippocampus for emotional memory. And then you start to think about Leo, the gentleman who passed out during your last speech, and you realize that this is probably not where you want to go with this speech. So as recently as yesterday, I have to admit that I was still stumped about what I might say to this group. And I tried a device that I've used before sometimes, which is to try and picture the group and picture what they might like to hear. And I realized as I pictured this group that there is not so much that I would say to this group as there are things that I have learned from this group. Paula, when I became president, very early on, instilled in me and reminded me of the importance of never backing away from excellence in anything that we do as a university. I've learned from Nancy Richardson the importance of hanging on to a vision when you have one, and seeing it through, even though there are times when it may be cloudy and it's more difficult to see than others. Amy Parsons over the years has reminded me of the importance of hiring people who are smarter and more energetic than you are. Lynn Johnson, our Chief Financial Officer and Vice President for University Operations, has taught me over and over again that to build things that last, they need to be put on a solid foundation. Marianne Taveros, our Vice President for Diversity, has taught me that it's not really a choir if you can't hear all the voices that are there. And Kara Neth, my Director of Administrative Communications, has taught me about the importance of using a voice if you have one. So many people have taught me so much. People in this room, I've had the privilege, and people who aren't here, I've had the privilege of working with Carol Blair as a young department head, Diana Wall, Nancy Hartley, Dean Ann Gill, Jane Neller, and Irene Vernon as previous chairs of the President's Commission on Women and Gender Equity, Ellen Fisher and Sue James, who are in those roles now and playing big roles for the university. Corey Wong, who has helped me with my own personal walk in understanding feminism and race and helping me to see into my own blind spots. Blanche Hughes, who I've learned more things from than I can possibly mention, and so many others, just too many to mention. And that makes me wonder about who it is we learn things from. Where along our path are we guided, nudged, shoved? And what influence does that have on us? Look at the analogy of a hike. You know, during the hike, you're looking down. You're trying to see where you'll place your foot so that you don't take a misstep. And you're hiking along, and all of a sudden you stop, and you pause, and you look back, and your perspective on that trail, on that hike, on that journey changes dramatically, and you see things in a different way. And as I was thinking about what I might say to all of you and the influence that many of you have had on me, I realized that as I look back over that trail, that walk of my life, there have been phenomenally important pushes, shoves, nudges, guideposts that came to me via the women that have been in my life. My mother, I recall her waking up in the cold, dark Midwest winter mornings, sick to death from the early chemotherapy of the 1970s, to go teach third graders, because she was a teacher, period, end of discussion. I recall a ninth grade teacher who reached out to a truculent young man sitting in the back row of a seventh period language arts class, remedial language arts, that's a different story. We'll cover that another day. And convinced him that he had something more to contribute if he were to work a little harder at it. A woman whose death taught me that sexual violence is never someone else's problem, that we cannot wish it away, that we can't be silent about it, and that men need to confront this, need to own it, and need to hold each other accountable for ending it. My own daughters, whose wonderful emerging voices as independent young women remind me on a daily basis of the blessing to work with the next generation and how absolutely fearless youth in that next generation always is. And my wife, a professional woman who, by virtue of my own walk, had her path challenged, who her balance of career and family and sense of self could very well have been completely consumed into a supporting role of a walk that was not hers, had she not been strong enough to continue her own path, and she has, and I could not be prouder of her for that. When I look around this room and I think about the women that have influenced my life, I see strength, courage, tenacity, ingenuity, inspiration. One of the greatest things about giving is that it induces change. And the gifts that I have been given over my lifetime have certainly induced change in me. Many of you in this room have, through your gifts, induced change in individual lives in big ways and in small ways. And as I look forward and look around this room and think about what you all will be doing, I wonder if we were to come back in 10 years, what change you will have induced at Colorado State University. Where will you have guided her, nudged her, shoved her? I don't know what those changes will be, but if history is any indication, and I'm confident it is, those changes will be spectacular. Thank you all for all that you do.